Hello and welcome to a new episode of Bite-Sized Book History. I'm your host, Allie Alvis, although some of you may know me better as Book Historia across various social media platforms. I'm a book historian and rare book cataloger at antiquarian book dealer Type Punch Matrix. Are you ready to rock? You may not think of special collections libraries as the home of heavy metal, but you'd be surprised at what you can find on the shelves. No, I'm not talking about big hair and guitars, I'm talking about metal book fittings. These metal fittings are collectively referred to as furniture and can act as bibliographic suits of armor and binding bling. To understand the origins of book furniture, we need to go back to the early days of the Codex. In the early Middle Ages, centuries before the advent of printing in the West, books were all written out by hand, often by monks in monasteries in the early days. These manuscripts could take years to produce, and between the cost of materials and the time it took to copy, and sometimes illuminate a whole book, they could be very expensive. So expensive, in fact, that the early 10th century monastery of Bobbio in Italy, which held around 600 manuscript books, was one of the largest libraries in Europe. In this period, the entirety of a monastic library could easily be stored in a locked chest or two, ideal for security, or on a few shelves. The point is, with fewer books, it generally wasn't such a tight squeeze to get them all onto the shelf, so onto their sides they went. This arrangement may also have been influenced by the way that scrolls were stored. While pulling a book off the shelf today is a fairly smooth affair, back in the days of flat storage, it meant a lot of sliding leather around on wooden surfaces. It does not bode well for a book's longevity if it's acquiring wear and tear simply by putting it on and taking it off the shelf. In order to elevate the book slightly from whatever surface it was placed on, medieval bookmakers began to add strategically placed metal nubbins to the front and back covers. It's the same concept as the little metal feet on the bottom of fancy purses. On books, these nubbins are broadly called bosses, and they were most often made of brass. Bosses can take on a more ornamental form, such as these, but the majority were fairly utilitarian. Another bit of binding bling that has a more practical background is metal clasps. Before paper became widespread in Europe, books were written on stretched and prepared animal hide, called parchment or vellum. In Europe, the hides in question most often came from cattle, sheep, or goats. While parchment is very strong and nice to write on, it tends to swell and contract with temperature and humidity changes. As the concept of a temperature and humidity controlled library is a relatively modern one, bookmakers had to come up with a solution for the tendency of manuscripts to become thick wedges when the weather changed. One solution was the use of heavy wooden boards for the front and back covers of the book. Another was metal clasps. Clasps literally clip the book shut, making it so the book can only swell to a small degree. They also perform the double duty of keeping dust from getting into the book while it sits on the shelf, as the pages are pressed tightly shut. Even after paper became the chief page material in books, metal clasps persisted. I mean, why wouldn't they? They're really cool. They're like little pieces of jewelry for a binding. You can see an example of later clasps on this nice little French psalm book, part of my personal collection. You can also see that one of the clasps is missing its locking mechanism, but this works in much the same way a larger book clasp would. You kind of have to press down on both boards to loosen the clasp from its little metal crossbar, and then it can be opened. You can see the crossbar here. Even paper swells and contracts to a certain degree with temperature and humidity changes, and while that might not be a problem for a little book like this, it certainly was for big chunky Bibles. In fact, by the 19th century, the idea of big fancy Bibles became so associated with clasps and other metal furniture that book buyers came to expect it when shelling out for family Bibles. Even if, by that point, the majority of the metal was purely aesthetic. That's why those gargantuan family Bibles, like the one that Joe Biden used in swearing the oath of office, are so particularly blingy. But if you really want binding bling, look no further than treasure bindings. Whatever image the phrase treasure binding calls to mind, you're probably on the right track. These metallic masterpieces are actually more like plates on top of more standard bindings, but they certainly give the impression that the whole book is a treasure chest. Treasure bindings pop up in literature as early as late antiquity, but such early examples unfortunately no longer survive. As you can imagine, such luxurious items were very desirable to both looters and cash-strapped noble owners, both of whom were known to break up these stunning bindings to sell their precious metals and stones. Most surviving examples of treasure bindings come from the medieval period, and adorn equally stunning illuminated manuscripts. Treasure bindings experienced a bit of a renaissance in the early 20th century, thanks to the bookbinders Sangorski and Sutcliffe. Sangorski and Sutcliffe tended to opt more for the gemstone element of the classic treasure binding, but you can clearly see the influence of the precious metals in their designs. Obviously, books with protruding metal bits do not make nice shelf mates. Not because the other books are jealous, but because they can't sit up flush against other books on the shelf without causing damage. It's a bit ironic that bosses, made to protect a book laying flat, actually do the opposite to other books when they're standing up. Most of the blingiest bindings are now closed in clamshell boxes, meant to protect them and the books around them. That does it for this episode of Bite-Sized Book History. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to click those manicules on the like and subscribe buttons. I'll see you next time, and remember, don't bite your books.